You think you can just waltz in here demanding explanations after everything this company has given you? Loyalty means knowing when to shut up and fall in line. HR has the paperwork ready downstairs. Sign it, clear your desk, and walk away quietly. Or we can make your exit as messy as you seem determined to make it. Hi, my name is Lauren Mitchell. I am 28 years old. The words landed exactly like he intended, cold, final, and designed to make me feel small. David Harlan, my boss, for the last 4 years, sat behind his oversized desk like he was already rewriting history in his head. I had spent those years pulling together the numbers that kept his division looking profitable on paper. Now he was trying to erase me with a stack of HR forms and that thin, practiced smile he used when he wanted someone to disappear without a scene. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry or beg. I simply picked up the single sheet of paper he had slid across the desk, the one that claimed mutual separation and included a confidentiality clause thick enough to choke on. My hand stayed steady, even though my stomach had dropped somewhere around my knees. 2 weeks earlier, I had flagged budget discrepancies that didn't make sense. Payments routed through a shell that traced back to my own brother's side consulting company. A slush fund David had been quietly feeding to cover a bad bet he made with company money. When I asked a simple question about the numbers, the performance review started. Then the sudden restructuring conversations. Then this. I folded the paper once and set it back down without signing. I'll need time to review this with someone who isn't trying to push me out the door. David's smile tightened. You don't have time, Lauren. The decision is already made. Patricia from HR will meet you in the lobby in 10 minutes. Don't make her come up here. Patricia Lang, the HR manager who had sat in on every one of those weaponized reviews, was the perfect accomplice. She knew how to document everything as performance concerns, while ignoring the actual financial red flags I had quietly compiled. They thought they could remove me before I connected the last dots. They were wrong. I stood up, smoothed the front of my blazer, and walked out of his office without another word. The hallway felt longer than usual. 2 coworkers glanced up from their desks and quickly looked away. Word had already spread that something was happening. I kept my face blank. Inside, the sarcastic voice that had kept me sane for years was already narrating the scene like a bad corporate thriller. Congratulations, Lauren. You finally found the one line they couldn't let you cross. Asking why the boss's numbers didn't add up? I didn't go straight to the lobby. I went to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the thin folder I had started building the night I first saw the mismatch transfers. Printed emails, bank routing confirmations, a quiet note from Jordan Reyes, the junior analyst who had slipped me the real meeting agenda after hours. Jordan had noticed the same patterns and was scared enough to help, but smart enough to stay in the shadows for now. The folder felt heavier than it should. Inside it was the proof that David hadn't just made a mistake. He had built a quiet pipeline through my brother Michael's company to move money that didn't belong to him. Michael had always been the risk taker in the family, the one who could charm his way into side deals. I had warned him years ago to keep his consulting work separate. He hadn't listened. Now David was using that connection to hide his own tracks, and they were both willing to throw me under the bus to keep it quiet. I closed the drawer, slipped the folder into my bag, and headed for the elevators. Patricia was already waiting in the lobby, clipboard in hand, expression professionally sympathetic. She didn't even pretend this was a surprise. Lauren, I know this is difficult, she started, voice low and practiced. But sometimes these transitions are for the best. The package is generous if you sign today. I looked at her the way I looked at a spreadsheet that refused to balance. I'm not signing anything until I've had a chance to speak with the people who actually own the company, Patricia, not the version David fed them. Her smile faltered for half a second. That was all I needed. She hadn't expected pushback this clean. She recovered quickly, but the crack was there. "The all-hands meeting is in 40 minutes, she said, recovering her tone. "David will be addressing the team about the restructuring. It would be better if you weren't in the building when that happens." I nodded once. I'll keep that in mind. I walked past her and out the glass doors into the cool afternoon. My car was 2 blocks away in the garage. I didn't run. I didn't look back. But every step felt like the floor could drop out from under me at any second. They had moved faster than I expected. The termination papers were already printed. The story about my departure was already being shaped for the room full of people who had no idea what was really happening upstairs. I sat in my car with the engine off and opened the folder again. The numbers stared back at me, ugly and undeniable. David had been bleeding the division for months, routing the shortfalls through Michael's shell so it looked like legitimate consulting spend. When I started asking questions, they didn't fix the problem. They tried to remove the person asking. My phone buzzed. A text from Jordan. "Jordan, they moved the all hands up. It's in 20 minutes now. David's going to announce you left to pursue other opportunities. Mr. Ellis is supposed to be there. I thought you should know. Thomas Ellis." The senior VP who had always been fair with me in the few meetings we'd had. David had been keeping him at arm's length for weeks, feeding him the same performance narrative he was selling everyone else. Jordan had overheard the assistant scheduling the room. Ellis wasn't supposed to be looped in on the real reason I was being pushed out. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. 20 minutes. That was the window. If I walked into that meeting with nothing but accusations, they would spin it as emotional and unstable. If I stayed away, they would write the ending without me. I started the car. The parking garage exit spit me out into afternoon traffic. I didn't head home. I drove toward the building's main conference floor entrance, the one employees use when they came back from off-site. My badge still worked. That was the first small mercy. They hadn't deactivated it yet. I parked in the visitor section, killed the engine, and sat for 30 seconds with my hands on the wheel. The sarcastic voice in my head was still running commentary. Nothing says moving on like showing up to your own firing party with a folder full of receipts. I almost smiled. Almost. I grabbed the folder, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and walked back into the building like I still belonged there. The conference room doors were already closed when I reached the hallway. I could hear David's voice through the thin walls, smooth and confident, already rewriting the last 4 years of my work as valuable contributions we'll miss. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Every head turned. David stopped mid-sentence. Patricia, standing near the front with her clipboard, went rigid. Jordan, sitting in the back row, went very still. And at the far end of the table, Thomas Ellis looked up from his notes with an expression I couldn't read yet. David recovered first. The thin smile returned, but it was tighter now. "Lauren, we weren't expecting you." I stayed by the door folder in my left hand, voice steady. "I figured. That's why I came." The room went quiet enough to hear the air conditioning click on. David's eyes flicked to Patricia, then back to me. He was already calculating how to spin this. I didn't give him the chance to start. "I have something the team should see before you finish telling them I left on good terms." I opened the folder. David's face changed. That was the moment everything shifted. Not because I raised my voice, not because I made a scene, but because the numbers I laid on the table didn't lie, and everyone in that room could read them. I spread the first few pages across the conference table. The ones with the highlighted routing numbers, and the dates that lined up too perfectly with the division's sudden consulting overruns. The room stayed quiet except for the low hum of the projector someone had forgotten to turn off. David's face had gone from that polished executive calm to something tighter around the eyes. He knew exactly what those numbers showed before anyone else did. "I flagged these 2 weeks ago." I said, keeping my voice even, the way I used to walk through quarterly reviews. Payments to a vendor that doesn't exist on any approved list, routed through a shell that traces straight to my brother's consulting LLC. The same LLC David approved for strategic partnerships last quarter. Funny how the money left our accounts, but never quite made it to any real work product. A couple of people in the back row shifted in their chairs. Jordan Reyes, sitting 2 seats down from me, kept his eyes on the papers like he was afraid looking up would make it real. Patricia Lang moved half a step closer to David, clipboard clutched like a shield. David let out a short, sharp laugh that didn't reach his eyes. This is exactly the kind of erratic behavior we've been documenting, Lauren. You're seeing patterns where there are none. Your brother's company was vetted. These are standard intercompany transfers. I pulled the next sheet from the folder and slid it toward Thomas Ellis at the head of the table. Standard transfers don't usually match the exact shortfall we reported internally 3 months ago. The one you signed off on as market adjustment, David? The same shortfall that magically disappeared after the money moved through Michael's accounts. I have the tax filings that show the discrepancy on both ends. You can call it whatever you want in here. Compliance is going to call it what it is. Patricia's voice cut in sharp and practiced. Lauren, this meeting was called to discuss restructuring. If you have concerns, the proper channel is through HR, not a public ambush. We can schedule a separate review once you've signed the separation agreement. I turned to her without raising my voice. The separation agreement that includes a clause promising I won't talk about any of this? The one that magically appeared the same day I asked about the vendor payments? That one. The silence stretched. Someone near the back coughed. David's hand tightened on the edge of the table. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, how fast he could spin this, who in the room would back him, how much damage control Patricia could do before legal got involved. He tried the charm first. Look, everyone here knows Lauren's been under a lot of pressure lately, personal issues. We've all tried to support her. But this kind of accusation, especially involving family, crosses a line. Security can escort her out if she won't leave voluntarily. That was the first mini cliffhanger. The room held its breath. 2 people actually stood up like they were ready to move. Jordan stayed seated, but his fingers were white around the edge of his chair. I felt the old familiar burn in my chest. The one that came every time someone in power tried to make me the unstable one for noticing what they didn't want seen. I didn't move. I just kept my eyes on David. Thomas Ellis finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried. David, sit down. I asked for these numbers myself last week after Lauren's initial flag. The routing doesn't lie. Neither do the approvals with your signature on them. David's head snapped toward him. For the first time, the mask slipped completely. Tom, this is not the time. It's exactly the time, Ellis said. He didn't raise his voice, but the room listened. I've been kept out of the loop on the performance narrative you've been feeding everyone. I started asking questions after the last board packet didn't match the internal reports. Lauren wasn't the only one digging. She was just the one they tried to remove first. That was the second shift. Patricia's clipboard lowered an inch. A few more people sat back down. The power in the room had moved, and everyone felt it. David's face flushed dark at the collar. He looked at me like I had personally set the building on fire. You have no idea what you're doing, he said, voice low and vicious, now the sarcasm stripped away. Your brother came to me. He needed the work. I gave it to him. If some of it got creative with the accounting, that's between him and whatever mess he's in. You want to burn this whole place down over family drama? Fine. But don't pretend you're the hero here. I let the words land. Then I answered with the same flat tone I used when a spreadsheet refused to reconcile. Michael's choices are his. I warned him years ago to keep his side work separate, but you used it. You covered your own shortfall with it. And when I noticed you and Patricia built a paper trail to fire me for asking, that's not family drama. That's you trying to erase the one person who could read the fine print. Ellis stood up slowly. He was older, silver at the temples, the kind of presence that made people stop talking without having to raise his voice. I've already looped compliance and outside counsel. The board will be reviewing the full chain by end of day. Lauren, I'd like you to stay for that conversation. David, Patricia, you're both on administrative leave effective immediately. Security will walk you to your offices to collect personal items only. David's mouth opened, then closed. The emotional crack showed for half a second raw, ugly panic underneath the executive polish. Patricia's face had gone sheet white. She looked at David like she was waiting for him to fix it, but he had nothing left to spin. The room stayed frozen. Jordan finally looked up at me, eyes wide, and gave the smallest nod. One of the junior managers near the door quietly closed her laptop. No one moved to help David or Patricia. The shift was complete. Ellis turned back to me. Lauren, walk with me. We have a lot to untangle, and I want your documentation before anyone else touches it. I picked up the folder. My hands were steady. The sarcastic voice in my head was still running, but quieter now, almost surprised. So this is what it feels like when the people who thought they held all the cards finally run out of moves. David didn't say another word as Ellis and I left the room. Patricia followed a few steps behind, already on her phone, probably calling the lawyer whose number she kept for exactly this kind of day. The hallway felt different on the way out, lighter, like the air had been holding its breath and finally let it go. Ellis didn't speak until we reached his office. He closed the door behind us and gestured to the chair across from his desk. I owe you an apology for not catching this sooner. David's been managing the narrative about you for weeks. I should have asked directly. I set the folder on his desk. You're asking now. That's more than most people in your position would do. He nodded once, then opened the folder and started scanning the pages I had marked. After a minute, he looked up. Your brother's involvement complicates this, but it doesn't change what David did with company funds. We'll need to bring Michael in for a conversation too. That part isn't going to be easy for you. I felt the final thread tighten. Cutting Michael off had been coming for years, but this was the moment it became real. The brother who had always taken the shortcut, who had let David use him as cover, who had stayed silent when I asked him about the payments last week. He had chosen the easy money over the truth. I had chosen the truth over keeping the peace. I know, I said, I'll handle it. Ellis studied me for a second longer. David and Patricia are done here. The board will want a clean transition. I'd like you to consider stepping into an interim role while we sort the rest. Not because you're the only one left standing, but because you're the one who refused to look away. I didn't answer right away. The offer sat between us like another document that needed careful reading. 4 years of being the reliable one, the one who fixed the messes quietly, and now the mess had exposed itself. I could walk away with my reputation intact and let someone else clean it up. Or I could stay long enough to make sure it stayed clean. Ellis waited. He didn't push. That alone felt different from every other conversation I'd had in this building. My phone buzzed in my bag. I didn't check it. I already knew it was probably Michael or my mother asking why I hadn't called back about the family dinner I had skipped last Sunday. The same patterns, just different rooms. I looked at Ellis. I'll stay through the review. After that, we can talk about what comes next. He nodded like that was the answer he had expected. Good. Let's get started. We spent the next hour walking through every page. Ellis took notes. I explained the timeline, the approvals, the way the money had moved in circles that only made sense if someone was hiding losses. He didn't interrupt. When we reached the last sheet, he set his pen down. "One more thing," he said. "David tried to isolate you from the board by telling us you were difficult to work with and emotionally volatile. I let him think I believed it long enough to see what he would do. That was a calculated risk on my part. I'm sorry it put you in the middle." I gave him the smallest smile, the bitter one that had kept me going through every gaslit performance review. It worked. He showed his hand. That's all that matters now. Ellis stood. Security is handling David and Patricia's exits. The team meeting is being adjourned with a short statement that an internal review is underway. You should go home and get some rest. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning with legal. I gathered the folder. My legs felt heavier than they had on the way in, but it was the weight of something finished, not something still hanging over me. At the door, I paused. Jordan Reyes helped me pull some of the initial flags I said. He stayed quiet and still showed up. He deserves to know he's not going to get punished for it. Ellis nodded. I'll make sure he's protected and recognized. I left his office and walked back through the building. Most people had already cleared out. A few glanced up as I passed, but no one stopped me. The story was already moving faster than David and Patricia could contain it. In the parking garage, I sat in my car again, engine off, the folder on the passenger seat. My phone had 3 missed calls from Michael and 1 text from my mother asking if everything was okay at work. I didn't answer either. The last family connection I still had any obligation to was about to be cut, and I was ready to let it go. Michael had made his choice when he let David use his company as cover. I had made mine when I refused to sign the paper that would have bought my silence. I started the car. The city lights blurred past the windshield as I drove. For the first time in weeks, the tightness in my chest had eased into something closer to clarity. They had tried to erase me with a story about performance and attitude. I had shown up with the numbers instead. The review would take days. The fallout would take longer. But the part where they got to decide who I was and what I was worth in that building was over. My phone buzzed again on the seat beside me. This time, it was Jordan. "Jordan, you okay? Ellis just sent an all-team note. David and Patricia are out. He named you as the one who flagged it. People are talking." I pulled over at the next light and typed back with one hand. "Me. I'm okay. Thanks for the heads up earlier. You did the right thing staying quiet until it mattered. Jordan. You too. See you tomorrow. Me. See you tomorrow." I set the phone down and pulled back into traffic. The sarcastic voice in my head had gone quiet for once. In its place was something steadier. I had walked into my own exit meeting and turned it into the moment they couldn't hide anymore. That was enough for tonight. Tomorrow would bring the next layer. Legal board the conversation with Michael I had been avoiding. But tonight, I was driving home with the folder still in the passenger seat, and the knowledge that the people who thought they could remove me without consequence were the ones packing their offices instead. The light turned green. I kept driving. I drove home that night with the folder on the seat beside me and the weight of what had just happened settling into something solid instead of heavy. Ellis had already sent the all-team note by the time I pulled into my building's garage. It was short, professional, and left no room for David's version of events. An internal review was underway. David Harlan and Patricia Lang were on administrative leave, and I had been asked to assist with documentation. No drama, just facts. The same facts that had almost cost me my job 2 hours earlier. The next morning, I walked back into the building like I still belonged there, because for the first time in weeks, I actually did. Jordan caught me in the hallway outside the conference room they had turned into a temporary war room. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Better than I was yesterday," I said. "You." He gave a small, tight smile. Ellis pulled me in first thing, told me I'm protected and that flagging stuff like that is exactly what the company needs more of. I think he meant it. I nodded. He does. Stick close to the truth and you'll be fine. Inside the room, Ellis, 2 people from compliance and outside counsel were already set up. They had pulled every approval, every transfer, every email chain David had tried to bury. By mid-morning, the picture was complete and ugly. David had been moving money through Michael's shell company to mask losses from a bad investment he had made with company funds 6 months earlier. The consulting fees were never real work. They were cover. When the numbers started looking suspicious internally, he and Patricia had accelerated the performance narrative around me to create a clean exit before anyone could connect the dots. David was brought in for his version. He tried the same smooth deflection he had used in the all hands. It lasted about 4 minutes. When Ellis laid out the tax filings that showed the exact mismatch on both ends and the approval signatures that only David could have authorized, the mask finally cracked all the way. He leaned forward, hands flat on the table, voice shaking with something between rage and panic. You people have no idea what it takes to keep a division like this afloat. One bad quarter and the board starts asking questions I couldn't answer without looking incompetent. Michael came to me. He needed the cash flow. I gave it to him. That's all this was, helping someone out and protecting the numbers. Ellis didn't raise his voice. You protected the numbers by committing fraud and then tried to fire the one employee who noticed. That's not helping. That's covering your own ass at everyone else's expense. David's face flushed deep red. For a second, I thought he might actually stand up and walk out. Instead, he sat back, the fight draining out of him in real time. His shoulders slumped. The confident executive who had told me 2 days earlier that the company could run just fine without me looked small and cornered. Patricia, sitting 2 chairs down, had tears tracking down her face without making a sound. She had already admitted her role in building the paper trail against me. The breakdown wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the quiet collapse of 2 people who had believed they could erase someone else to save themselves. By the end of the day, the decision was made. David and Patricia were terminated for cause. Compliance opened a formal investigation that would likely lead to civil and possibly criminal referrals. The board issued a short public statement about leadership changes and an ongoing review. My name stayed out of it exactly the way Ellis had promised. That evening, I met Michael at a coffee shop halfway between our places. He looked tired and defensive before I even sat down. Lauren, whatever they're saying at your office, it's not what you think. He started. David approached me. I didn't go looking for trouble. I set my bag on the chair beside me and didn't bother with small talk. You let him route company money through your LLC to hide his losses. You took the fees. When I asked you about it last week, you lied to my face. That's exactly what I think. He shifted in his seat. It was just supposed to be temporary. I needed the work. He needed the cover. Nobody was supposed to get hurt, except the people whose bonuses got smaller because the division was supposedly underperforming, I said. And me, when they decided the easiest way to shut me up was to fire me and call it mutual. You chose the money, Michael. I'm choosing not to keep pretending we're still family after that. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he looked genuinely shaken instead of calculating. You're cutting me off. I'm done protecting people who use me as collateral, I said. Mom and Dad can decide where they stand. But I'm not explaining this at Sunday dinner or pretending it didn't happen. This is the line. Cross it, and there's nothing left to talk about. He didn't argue. He just nodded once, eyes on the table, and stood up. I watched him walk out. The last thread snapped without much noise. It hurt. but it was the clean kind of hurt that comes after you finally stop carrying someone else's mess. Ellis called the next morning. The board had voted to offer me the interim director role while they completed the review and restructured the division. Full authority over the budget and reporting lines, a significant salary adjustment, and a public acknowledgement in the next all hands that the concerns I had raised had been substantiated and addressed. I took the weekend to think about it, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted the decision to be mine instead of reactive. Monday morning, I accepted on 2 conditions. Jordan Reyes would be promoted into a role with real visibility and protection, and I would have final say on any external communications about what had happened. Ellis agreed without hesitation. The following week, the all hands was standing room only. Ellis opened it. He didn't name David or Patricia. He simply said the leadership change was the result of an internal review that had uncovered improper financial practices, that the employee who had first flagged the issues had been instrumental in protecting the company, and that going forward, the expectation was transparency over optics. Then he introduced me as the interim lead. I stood at the front of the room and kept it short. I didn't come here to give a speech. I came here to do the job the way it should have been done all along, by looking at the numbers and telling the truth about them. If anyone in this room has questions or concerns, my door is open. We fix things by facing them, not by removing the people who notice. The applause was polite, but real. Jordan caught my eye from the 3rd row and gave a small thumbs up. For the first time in 4 years, I felt like the room was actually on the same side as the work. In the months that followed, the division stabilized. The money that had been moved was accounted for and recovered where possible. Compliance finished its review and referred the matter appropriately. David and Patricia disappeared from the company directory and from any professional circles that mattered. I heard through a mutual contact that David had tried to spin his exit as a strategic departure at a networking event and had been met with very cold shoulders. Patricia had quietly left the state. Their breakdown in that conference room had been the beginning of the end for both of them. Michael never reached out again. My parents tried once a stiff phone call from my mother asking if I was really going to let this destroy the family. I told her the family had already been destroyed the moment they chose to look the other way. Then I hung up. The silence after that call felt like breathing room I hadn't known I was missing. I kept the interim role for 6 months before the board offered it to me permanently. I accepted, not because the title mattered, but because I had earned the authority to make sure nothing like this happened again on my watch. Jordan thrived in his new position. Ellis became someone I could actually trust in leadership. The work itself didn't change, but the environment around it did. People stopped walking on eggshells. Numbers were questioned out loud instead of buried. The sarcastic voice in my head never fully went away. It still pipes up sometimes when I see a spreadsheet that doesn't balance, or hear someone try to spin a problem into someone else's fault. But now it sounds more like a reminder than a wound. Read the fine print. Show up with the evidence. Don't let them rewrite you. I had spent years being the reliable one who fixed things quietly while other people took credit and covered their tracks. The moment I refused to be erased, everything shifted. Not because I raised my voice or made a scene, but because I brought the one thing they couldn't argue with: proof. David and Patricia had tried to remove me to protect a lie. Instead, they removed themselves. My brother had chosen the easy money. I chose the truth. The cost was real family connections I no longer carried, a version of corporate life that had been comfortable in its dysfunction. But the freedom on the other side was worth every cut. I own my story now. No one else gets to narrate it for me. Thank you for listening to my story. If your boss ever tried to rewrite your contributions or remove you to cover their own mess, what would your limit be? Tell me in the comments where you would draw the line and what you would do when you reached it.